Ann Burgund, thank you for joining us on Coloris. What was it like to be on the ground floor as Sesame Street began?
That's a huge question. It was the most amazing, magical experience. I kind of tapped into it. I hadn't even owned a television at the time, didn't know how to turn one on, didn't know how to find a channel, and I had this brilliant idea. I want to be in television. And the researcher from Time magazine said, oh, well, there's this new show coming out this fall called Sesame Street. And I'd never heard of it. And I called Joan Cooney. She gave me the number. And right then, I got a job on the show as information assistant. But that's how things happen. People came, it seemed to be drawn together. So many brilliant people. And such as John Stone, Jim Henson, Joe Raposo, Jeff Moss. These are the key people in the beginning. So it felt like, even though the staff was very small, it felt like a huge forces coming together.
Who came up with the idea for Sesame Street?
Well, that was Joan Gans Cooney. She was in a supermarket in Atlanta, Georgia, and she heard a little black guy, about 3, singing the Pepsi commercial over and over and over. And she said, the light bulb went on. That's what he learned. He knew the words, he knew the lyrics perfectly. And so that was her seminal moment to create. She'd always wanted to create children's television for education. And she went back and met with Lloyd Morissette, who was with Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And there was this famous dinner. They had beef Wellington. And she pitched the idea of having a television show to sell education. And they funded it and they bought it. Well, again, based on the idea that a lot of repetition and catchy tunes, characters that appeal to children, back to really the most creative force, John Stone, the producer. Once you trace back, you ask a question, it sort of all traces back to him. He found Jim Henson, he wrote the pilot. The first, they couldn't name the show, it was called the Itty Bitty Nitty Gritty Kitty Show. They had 2 days to actually come up with a title and a name, and someone said Sesame Street.
Really?
For open sesame, open learning, open the doors to learning. And they had to have a name by next Monday, so that was it. Well, puppets can be so appealing to kids. Big Bird was the puppet, Muppet. They're not puppet, they're Muppets.
Okay.
That was most like a child. That was his design. He was the one to be most childlike. And then all the others are their own characters. Like Bert and Ernie. They have their own stories, they have long character profiles. You know, Bert has a rubber ducky. Ernie has his paperclip collection. So he's like very staid and boring, and Ernie is dum-de-dum, you know. So they play off each other very well. So all the characters were created by Jim Henson, the Muppets, and then he just doodled and came up with the faces, and then his shop built the actual puppets. Oh, they're just geniuses. Jim Henson, Frank Oz. They would just have the look based on Jim's doodles, and then they would expand, like anyone that writes a novel or creates a character for a film. They would do in-depth character profiles for each character, and they've stayed true to that. I've thought a lot about this 50 years hence. And there were several reasons I think that it was so creative. One is it was based on research. For a whole year, there was research about what children watched. They would sit in front of television, the kids, and watch the children watching TV, and what part of the screen they watched, when they disengaged.
So they're tracking their eye movements?
Yes.
Okay.
So one piece of the creativity was a strict Bible of curriculum. It was like a thick notebook. And everything on the show had to adhere to that. But that being said, they had free reign to just say and do anything. And that's why so much is on a double level. That adults loved it and kids loved it as well, because no one was really sitting around wondering, oh, I wonder if they're going to like this. Oh, I wonder, if this will be okay. They just did what they thought was funny. I was just enchanted. I loved it from the opening note. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Joe Raposo wrote. And I didn't see it until after I was on staff, because I got there just at that juncture. And I thought it was very busy and very noisy. So the first film I made was called Flying, and it was very silent and lyrical. It was a bald eagle flying and then landing. And I was on staff as part of a film team. There were 3 of us, and then there were 2 of us. We did everything in the film area. In other words, the show was taped on the street, the Muppets were taped also, and then there were animations which came in from outside producers. Then there was an in-house film department, and that was my role. My first reaction was when I was watching that show, but I was ironing in my apartment with my back to the TV, and suddenly it went quiet, and I whipped around, and it was my film. So it had the effect that it had the effect that I wanted, to catch your attention by a lower key. Kermit. Well, it isn't easy being green. I think that's very appealing. He's so vulnerable. And Kermit. Well, again, that was Jim Henson. And it was just all the same way of, who can say how these ideas come? But you could feel when you were around Jim Henson and Frank Oz, you could feel this channel of genius. I don't know how else to say it. That it was just an energy that came through them. Even at the time, we were a very small team, and I was close friends with Frank and Jim, and going out, say, socially to a party or something, they didn't have any puppets, they didn't have any recognizable puppets with them, but one time Frank put on a little sock and went like this, and the kids just went berserk, just because of the energy that they conveyed. No, I could say Miss Piggy is not a Sesame Street character later, but how Miss Piggy came to be was there was a whole team of Muppets dancing around, and suddenly Frank flew across the whole batch and went, hi-ya! And it was a karate chop. And that moment was the birth of Miss Piggy. And then came 25 pages of a character description. I've been to a lot of Muppet tapings, and you can just feel that. And there's a quote in the 40th anniversary book on Sesame Street where Frank said, when I finish taping, I really have no idea what happened. It's just that, because it's such a pure energy that comes through, and it's not something I can explain. I remembered the fun of it, the laughter, the joy. I also remember just being granted permission to do anything. When I first came, I was information assistant. That is, I told everybody, reporters, people writing books, about the show and took them around the studio and everything. And then one day John Stone came to me, he's the producer, really the creative heart of the show, and he said, I don't like the film part of the show, and I want you to go find really jazzy, lots of special effects, really some great film, and I want it for free, and we'll give them credit. So I went and researched, and I did find some footage, outtakes from Disney that were donated, outtakes from Pepsi commercials, different things, and I went over to the film room with this can of film, and Dorothy Todd and Margaret Murphy were there. And they said, well, we don't have time, you do it. So they sat me down at the Steenbeck with the 16 millimeter film and the splicing tape, and Joe Raposo next door writing all the music. And that's how I started making films. It just took.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, a lot of people at Sesame Street have that experience. With John, another woman, Lisa Simon, was a stagehand. And John Stone said to her there was another bit for that day, and he said, well, I'm leaving, you do it. And she did, and she became one of the directors, one of the regular directors on the show. So everybody was lifted up because we had the rule book, we had the curriculum, we knew our mandate. I just think that's so important for creativity, that you know you have a straight focus about what you're doing, and then you do it, but you take a lot of creative energy to it. You're not. We produced 130 hour-long shows that year, so we had to know what we were doing. The production schedule comprised of, each script had anywhere from 5 to 12 minutes of new material on the street. And there was a season, like any television show, and we filmed, so November 10th, 1969, the first show went on the air, and then May was the end of that season. So during production, we filmed the new street material, and then separately, when the studio was on break from that production, 3 or 4 months in late summer, the Muppets were filmed. So all the Muppet bits were filmed for that year.
Mm-hmm.
And then the show was put together from a library of thousands of films and bits, including my films and the other films that came in from outside producers, and the Muppet bits and the street bits, and they were all drawn around the letter, the number, and the goal for the day. The idea that young inner city kids from 3 to 5 were not getting the help that they needed. There was a program called Head Start at the time, but Joan wanted to expand on that and really give those young children a chance to be ready for preschool that they hadn't had before. Mm-hmm. And television was the broadest way to reach them. They were just not even thinking beyond just this moment and what we were doing. And even towards the end of the first year, it was so popular that the international versions wanted to do shows, and there weren't the elements. We hadn't even made tracks to prepare for other people to do it. That is, music and effects were all blended in with the English. Mm-hmm. So I volunteered to spend, besides my day job of making films, every night and weekend for 9 months, separating out the M&E so that Plaza Sesamo could happen. So that's how I would say unprepared. It's just they didn't really think that it was going to be so huge. It wasn't part of the goal. The goal was to reach the young children that were more disadvantaged. Again, it's because of those elements of being able to design something that they knew was going to appeal to children because of the research. And just because of the forces that came together at that time, the people that came together at that time. That is so true. We had a live feed in my film room from the studio so we could hear everything that went on all day long at the studio. And let me tell you that it was far more hilarious off camera. And so yeah, everybody was just having fun most of the time. That's what I thought at the time. It was just like being in some other magic kingdom or some other world. I did have to leave Sesame Street because they cut the film department. That was the first budget cut towards 1975, and I think that is the main, again, those particular talents that came together at that time created this the sum of the part, the parts, the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. I learned not to worry about what other people think. There was a reading show, Electric Company, that
I remember that too.
was created in our room, the film room, and it was a different staff, but similar. A few people were the same, and so standing around the editing machine, I wonder if Frank Rich will he's the New York Times TV critic.
Right.
I wonder what he will say. And it didn't have so second guessing or not really doing what you feel is right or funny or what you think is, enjoyable. That was a big lesson to me when I saw that the Electric Company didn't have the lasting, it went for a couple of years. But so that lesson of just being able to do what you think. Within reason, again, within the bounds of the curriculum. And to see the lesson, we had also a mandate of diversity. We had a very diverse staff. Of course, all the characters were diverse and everybody loved each other and got along. Well, just more compassion and more understanding of people different from yourself. And at the time, I had family living in Atlanta, and I went back and I saw a very different world than what we were trying to create on Sesame Street. So in terms of, again, different races, different people, everybody is the same underneath. Thank you very much. It's just that it's very hard to put into words the sort of overall feeling that I sensed at the time that something was happening. It's really more of just sort of, there was a grace about it. There was the combining of, again, I'm just repeating myself, of the creativity and the joy. And our staff was also diverse. That was part of the mandate. And so this was the first time, I was young at the time, but this was the first time that I had experienced that type of environment. And yeah, I will never forget it.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.